When I saw my husband scrolling through my phone, my heart jumped, but not from fear of being caught. It was from knowing he would see those messages. The ones I forgot to delete. I tried to snatch the phone from his hands, but he pulled back smoothly and kept reading. I watched his face change as he read line by line, feeling my life crumble in seconds. Yes, now he would learn the truth. But not the whole truth. His hands trembled as he scrolled further, and I knew, any moment now he'd reach that message that would destroy my life. The one that would explain everything and put a final period. Or make everything even more confusing. My phone suddenly vibrated in his hands, and a new notification appeared on the screen. I saw his face go pale as he read the sender's name. My husband froze. Didn't even blink. I bit the inside of my cheek, an old habit when I'm nervous. My nerves mixed with the horror of realizing what I had done. His breathing quickened. I could hear it even from 6 feet away. This was exactly what I feared most. Because 3 months ago I made a mistake, the kind that changes everything forever, and now. I didn't know what to do, but let me tell you how it all really happened. Before I share the secret I tried so hard to hide for so long, write in the comments what city you're watching this from, and answer this question: have you ever had a secret you tried desperately to hide, but ultimately couldn't keep it buried? I used to think marriage was supposed to feel like home. 7 years ago, when I walked down that aisle in my grandmother's ivory dress, I believed I was stepping into my forever. The reception hall still sparkled in my memory, white roses, champagne toasts, and my husband's hand warm in mine as we swayed to our first dance. Back then, his touch sent electricity through my whole body. Back then, he looked at me like I was the only woman in the world. Now, at 47, I folded laundry in our suburban kitchen while he worked late again. The granite countertops gleamed under the pendant lights, everything in its perfect place, just like my life was supposed to be. Perfect house, perfect husband, perfect marriage. Except perfection, I'd learned, could feel a lot like suffocation. The washing machine hummed its familiar tune, and I found myself matching my breathing to its rhythm. In, out. In, out. Another Tuesday evening, another dinner eaten alone while staring at my phone, waiting for his text that he'd be late. Again. The pot roast I'd made sat covered in foil, getting cold like so many meals before it. I caught my reflection in the kitchen window, shoulder-length brown hair pulled back in the same ponytail I'd worn for years, reading glasses perched on my nose, wearing the comfortable jeans and sweater that had become my uniform. When had I stopped trying? When had I become invisible, even to myself? The front door opened, and I heard his familiar footsteps in the hallway. "Hey," he called out, his voice carrying that distant tone that meant his mind was still at the office. "Sorry I'm late. The Henderson account needed." "It's fine," I interrupted, though it wasn't. Nothing about this felt fine anymore. He appeared in the doorway, loosening his tie, looking every bit the successful businessman he'd worked so hard to become. Salt and pepper hair perfectly styled, expensive suit tailored to his lean frame. He was still handsome, still the man who'd swept me off my feet in college. But somewhere along the way, we'd stopped seeing each other. "Did you eat?" I asked, gesturing toward the covered dish. "Grabbed something at the office." He kissed my cheek, a perfunctory peck that felt more like checking off a to-do list item. "I need to make a few calls before bed." And just like that, he disappeared into his study, leaving me alone with the cold pot roast and the growing ache in my chest. I'd spent the afternoon cooking his favorite meal, hoping maybe tonight would be different. Maybe tonight we'd sit at the table and actually talk, really talk, the way we used to. Instead, I scraped the untouched food into containers, the scraping sound echoing in the quiet kitchen. This was my life. Had been my life for longer than I cared to admit. We were roommates pretending to be lovers, two people sharing space but not sharing anything that mattered. I couldn't remember the last time he'd really looked at me, the last time we'd had a conversation that wasn't about schedules or household logistics. I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt desired, or even desired anything myself. That night, lying in our king-sized bed with 2 feet of cold space between us, I stared at the ceiling and wondered if this was all there was. If this polite, predictable existence was what I'd signed up for when I'd said I do. My husband's breathing had already settled into the deep rhythm of sleep, and I envied his ability to simply switch off, to find peace in unconsciousness. But sleep wouldn't come for me. Instead, I lay there thinking about the woman in the wedding photos scattered throughout our house. She'd been so alive, so full of hope and passion. What had happened to her? Where had she gone? I pressed my hand to my chest, feeling my heart beat against my palm, proof that I was still alive even when I felt like I was slowly fading away. Tomorrow, I decided, something had to change. I didn't know what or how, but this hollow existence couldn't continue. I needed to find that woman again, the one who believed in love and passion and the possibility that life could be extraordinary. I just had no idea that change was already on its way to my front door. His nephew arrived on a Thursday morning while I was scrubbing coffee stains from the kitchen sink. I heard the taxi pull up and watched through the window as a tall figure emerged, pulling a duffel bag from the trunk. 28 years old, my husband had mentioned, staying with us for a few weeks while he figured out his next move after finishing graduate school. Family obligation, he'd said with that tone that suggested I should be grateful for his generosity. I dried my hands on the dish towel and went to answer the door before he could knock. "You must be the unemployed nephew crashing your perfect home," he said with a self-deprecating smile that caught me off guard. "Sorry for the inconvenience." His eyes were the same green as my husband's, but where my husband's had grown distant and calculating over the years, his held warmth and mischief. Sandy brown hair fell across his forehead in a way that suggested he'd forgotten to get it cut, and his clothes, faded jeans and a wrinkled button-down, spoke of someone who hadn't quite embraced the corporate world his uncle inhabited. "Don't be ridiculous," I said, stepping aside to let him in. "We're happy to have you. I'm the beautiful aunt I've heard absolutely nothing about," he finished, and I felt heat rise to my cheeks. When was the last time anyone had called me beautiful? When was the last time anyone had really looked at me at all? I busied myself showing him to the guest room, pointing out fresh towels and explaining how the shower worked, trying to ignore the way his presence seemed to fill spaces that had felt empty for so long. He listened with genuine attention, asking questions about the neighborhood, complimenting the photographs on the walls. Such simple interactions, but they made me feel seen in a way I'd almost forgotten was possible. "Your husband's lucky," he said as we stood in the hallway, and something in his tone made me look up sharply. His eyes met mine and held them for just a moment too long. "This is a beautiful home." That afternoon, while my husband worked late again, I found myself cooking with more care than I had in months. I chose a dress instead of my usual jeans, applied lipstick for the first time in weeks. Just being polite to a houseguest, I told myself, but my reflection in the bathroom mirror suggested otherwise. My cheeks had color, my eyes had spark. I looked alive. Dinner was the first real conversation I'd had in our dining room in years. He asked about my life, my interests, my dreams, questions my husband had stopped asking long ago. I found myself talking about the photography hobby I'd abandoned, the novel I'd started writing but never finished, the places I'd always wanted to travel but never suggested because my husband preferred familiar vacation spots. "Why did you stop?" he asked when I mentioned the photography. "Life, I guess. Responsibilities." The words sounded hollow even to me. "That's a shame. You should start again." Such a simple suggestion, but it hit me like a revelation. Why shouldn't I start again? Who had decided that being a wife meant giving up the things that made me me? After dinner, I insisted on doing the dishes while he relaxed, but he followed me to the kitchen anyway, leaning against the counter as I worked. We talked about books, movies, the kinds of meandering conversations that happen naturally when two people genuinely enjoy each other's company. I found myself laughing at his stories, sharing my own, feeling more like myself than I had in years. "You have a beautiful laugh," he said suddenly, and the dish I was washing slipped from my hands, clattering against the stainless steel sink. I turned to face him, my heart racing for reasons I didn't want to examine too closely. He was standing closer than I'd realized, close enough that I could smell his cologne, see the flecks of gold in his green eyes. Close enough that when he reached up to brush a strand of hair from my face, I didn't step away. I started to say, but the words died when he cupped my face in his hands. "Should what?" he whispered, and I couldn't remember. Couldn't think of a single reason to step back, to remember my vows, to remember who I was supposed to be. We kissed. It was soft at first, tentative, like we were both surprised to find ourselves there. Then deeper, more urgent, as years of loneliness and longing poured out of me into that moment. His hands tangled in my hair, and I pressed closer, feeling alive in a way that terrified and thrilled me. When we finally broke apart, we stared at each other in shocked silence. I could hear my husband's voice from his study, talking on another conference call, completely oblivious to the fact that his world had just shifted on its axis. "I should go," he said quietly, but he didn't move. Neither did I. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed listening to my husband's steady breathing, replaying those moments in the kitchen over and over until they felt like scenes from someone else's life. Had I really kissed my husband's nephew? Had I really stood in my own kitchen, in my own marriage, and felt more alive than I had in years? The rational part of my mind screamed that it was wrong, that I was a married woman who'd made promises and built a life with a good man. But the other part, the part that had been slowly suffocating for years, whispered that maybe, just maybe, I deserved to feel wanted again. Morning came too quickly and too slowly all at once. My husband left early for a breakfast meeting, kissing my cheek with the same absent-minded affection he'd shown for months. "Don't wait up tonight," he said, adjusting his tie in the hallway mirror. "The Morrison presentation needs to be perfect." After he left, I found myself standing in the kitchen where it had happened, touching my lips and wondering if I'd imagined the whole thing. But then footsteps on the stairs told me I hadn't, and my heart started racing all over again. "Good morning," he said, appearing in the doorway looking rumpled and uncertain. "I was hoping we could talk." I poured him coffee with hands that trembled slightly, hyper-aware of every movement, every breath. We sat at the breakfast table where my husband and I usually read our phones in silence, but this felt different. Charged. Dangerous. "About last night," he began. "It was a mistake," I said quickly, the words I'd rehearsed in the dark hours before dawn. "I'm married. Happily married. It can't happen again." He studied my face with those too perceptive eyes. "Are you? Happily married?" The question hung between us like a challenge. I opened my mouth to say yes, of course. What kind of question was that? But the word wouldn't come. Instead, I found myself really looking at my life, at this beautiful house that felt like a museum, at the marriage that had become a series of polite transactions. "That's not the point," I finally said. "Isn't it?" He leaned forward, his voice gentle but insistent. "When was the last time you were happy? Really, genuinely happy?" I couldn't answer because I couldn't remember. Contentment, yes. Satisfaction with my comfortable life, sometimes. But pure, uncomplicated happiness? The kind that makes you want to dance in your kitchen or laugh until your sides ache? I couldn't pinpoint when I'd last felt that. "He doesn't see you," he continued, and his words cut deeper because they were true. Last night, at dinner, you lit up talking about your photography, your writing. You were incredible. But he doesn't know that woman exists, does he? Tears pricked my eyes because he was right. My husband loved the version of me that kept his house clean and his social calendar organized. He loved the wife who smiled at his colleagues and never caused drama. But the woman who dreamed of traveling to Iceland to photograph the northern lights? The one who once stayed up all night writing poetry? That woman had been quietly disappearing for years. It doesn't matter, I whispered. It matters to me. He reached across the table and covered my hand with his. You matter to me. The simple touch sent electricity up my arm, and I knew I should pull away. Should stand up, should remember my vows, should act like the responsible adult I was supposed to be. Instead, I turned my hand over so our palms touched, and the rightness of it scared me more than anything. This is insane, I said, but I didn't let go. Maybe. Or maybe it's the first sane thing either of us has done in a long time. We sat there holding hands across my breakfast table, and I felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff. I could step back to safety, to my predictable life and my comfortable marriage. Or I could jump and discover what it felt like to fly, even if it meant eventually hitting the ground. My phone buzzed with a text from my husband, working through lunch. Don't cook anything special tonight. The casual dismissal, the assumption that my time meant nothing, the complete lack of consideration, it was such a small thing, but it crystallized everything that was wrong. I was 47 years old, and I'd been making myself smaller and smaller to fit into someone else's idea of what a wife should be. I looked at the man across from me, this unexpected catalyst who'd walked into my kitchen and reminded me that I was still a woman with desires and dreams and the right to be seen. Really seen. My husband's working late again tonight, I heard myself say, and the words felt like stepping off that cliff. His eyes darkened with understanding and something that looked like hope. What are you saying? I was saying that maybe it was time to stop apologizing for taking up space. Maybe it was time to stop being grateful for crumbs when I'd been starving for a feast. Maybe it was time to remember who I used to be before I became someone's convenient wife. I'm saying, I whispered, that some mistakes are worth making. The words hung in the air between us like a confession, and I watched his face change as he understood what I was offering. Not just a moment of weakness, not just a stolen kiss in an empty kitchen, but something more deliberate. More dangerous. Are you sure? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I wasn't sure of anything except that I couldn't keep living the half-life I'd been existing in for years. My marriage had become a beautiful prison, and I'd been such a model prisoner that I'd almost forgotten what freedom felt like. Almost. No, I admitted. I'm not sure of anything anymore. He squeezed my hand gently. We don't have to. I know. And I did know. This wasn't about pressure or manipulation. It was about choice. My choice. For the first time in years, I was choosing something for myself, not because it was expected or responsible or safe. The day passed in a strange, heightened awareness. Every mundane task, making lunch, folding laundry, answering emails, felt surreal, like I was watching someone else live my life while I waited for evening to come. He spent most of the afternoon reading in the living room, occasionally looking up to catch my eye across the house. Those glances sent electricity through me, reminders of the decision we'd made together. My husband called around 3 to say he'd be working until at least 10, maybe later. There's leftover Chinese food in the fridge, he said, as if I were incapable of feeding myself. Don't wait up. I wanted to feel guilty about the relief that flooded through me, but I couldn't summon the emotion. Instead, I found myself taking more care with my appearance than I had in months. I showered and actually dried my hair instead of letting it air dry. I put on makeup, not much, but enough to feel like myself again. I chose a dress I hadn't worn in over a year, one that made me feel feminine and attractive instead of just presentable. When I looked in the mirror, I saw echoes of the woman I used to be. The one who'd believed she deserved to be desired, who'd thought love was supposed to make you feel alive instead of merely secure. Dinner was different this time. The conversation flowed easily, but underneath it was an electric tension that made every casual touch of our hands reaching for the salt, every shared laugh, feel charged with possibility. We were both aware of what we'd agreed to, both nervous and excited and terrified in equal measure. "Tell me about your dreams," he said as I cleared the plates. "The real ones, not the ones you think you're supposed to have." I paused, a wine glass halfway to the dishwasher. "I wanted to be a photographer," I said slowly. "Not just as a hobby. I wanted to travel, to capture moments and stories and make people feel something when they looked at my work." "What stopped you?" "Life. Marriage. The practical need for steady income." The words sounded hollow even to me. "My husband thought it was unrealistic." "What do you think?" Such a simple question, but it hit me like a revelation. What did I think? When had I stopped considering my own opinion about my own life? "I think," I said carefully, "that I let fear make my decisions for me. Fear of failure, fear of instability, fear of being selfish." He stood and moved closer, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "And now?" "Now I'm tired of being afraid." He reached up and touched my face, his thumb tracing along my cheekbone. "You're beautiful when you're not afraid." The words went straight through me, because I realized he was right. For years, I'd been beautiful in the way a museum piece is beautiful, lovely to look at but untouchable, lifeless. Now I felt vibrant, alive, dangerously real. "I don't know what I'm doing," I whispered. "Neither do I," he admitted. "But I know I can't pretend I don't feel this. Can't pretend you don't matter to me." The honesty in his voice undid me completely. When was the last time someone had said I mattered? When was the last time I'd felt like I mattered to myself? He leaned down slowly, giving me time to pull away, time to remember my vows and my responsibilities and all the reasons this was wrong. Instead, I rose to meet him halfway. We kissed. This time it wasn't tentative or surprised. This time it was deliberate, hungry, full of all the longing I'd been denying for years. His hands tangled in my hair, and I pressed closer, feeling like I was drowning and being saved at the same time. When we broke apart, we were both breathing hard. The kitchen around us, my kitchen, the heart of my married life, seemed to fade away until there was nothing but this moment, this choice, this man who saw me as a woman worth wanting. "Are you still sure?" he asked against my forehead. I thought about my husband, probably sitting in his office right now, focused entirely on spreadsheets and profit margins. I thought about our bed, where we slept like polite strangers. I thought about the woman I'd been slowly becoming, smaller, quieter, more convenient. Then I looked at the man in front of me, who'd spent 2 days reminding me that I was still alive, still capable of passion, still worthy of being chosen. "Yes," I said, and meant it completely. I led him upstairs with hands that trembled slightly, not from fear but from anticipation. Each step felt like crossing into new territory, leaving behind the woman I'd been for 7 years and becoming someone I'd almost forgotten existed. The house felt different around us, no longer a showcase of successful marriage but simply walls and rooms, space we were claiming for ourselves. At the top of the stairs, I hesitated for just a moment. My bedroom, our bedroom, was to the right, but I couldn't. Not there. Instead, I turned left toward the guest room where he'd been staying, where the bed was still unmade from his restless night, where nothing carried the weight of my marriage vows. "Here?" he asked softly, understanding my hesitation without needing explanation. "Here," I confirmed, and stepped inside. The room was bathed in the golden light of late afternoon, warm and forgiving. His few possessions were scattered around, a book on the nightstand, clothes draped over the chair, his cologne lingering in the air. It felt like a sanctuary, separate from the rest of my carefully curated life. He closed the door behind us, and the soft click seemed to seal us away from the world outside. From responsibilities and expectations and the life I'd built so carefully. In this room, I wasn't a wife or a hostess or a woman trying to be perfect. I was just myself, raw and real and finally alive. "We can stop," he said, reading something in my face. "Anytime you want to stop." But I didn't want to stop. For the first time in years, I wanted to move forward instead of staying safely in place. I wanted to choose passion over security, risk over certainty, my own desires over everyone else's expectations. "I don't want to stop," I said, and the words felt like the truest thing I'd spoken in years. What happened next was tender and desperate and perfect in ways I'd forgotten were possible. Not the mechanical intimacy my marriage had become, but something that felt like coming home to myself. Every touch reminded me that I was still a woman capable of passion, still someone worth choosing, still alive in all the ways that mattered. We spent the night together. Afterward, I lay in his arms listening to his heartbeat, feeling more myself than I had in years. The guilt I'd expected didn't come. Instead, there was a deep sense of rightness, like puzzle pieces finally clicking into place. This was what I'd been missing, what I'd been slowly dying without, the feeling of being truly seen and chosen and desired. "No regrets," he whispered into my hair. I considered the question seriously. Should I regret betraying my marriage vows? Should I feel ashamed of choosing my own happiness over my husband's comfortable assumptions? Should I be terrified of what this meant for my carefully constructed life? None, I said, and surprised myself by meaning it completely. We talked in whispers as the night deepened around us, sharing stories and dreams and fears like teenagers at a sleepover. He told me about his struggles to find his place in the world, his fears about disappointing his family, his dreams of making something meaningful of his life. I told him about the woman I used to be, the dreams I'd put aside, the slow suffocation of becoming someone else's idea of perfect. "You could pick up your camera again," he said. "Start taking pictures. See where it leads." Such a simple suggestion, but it felt revolutionary. I wouldn't even know where to start. With the first picture. Then the second. Then the third. He traced lazy patterns on my shoulder with his fingertip. "You don't have to have it all figured out. You just have to begin." As dawn approached, reality began to creep back in. My husband would return tomorrow evening. Life would resume its normal patterns. But something fundamental had shifted inside me, and I knew I could never go back to being the woman I'd been yesterday. "What happens now?" I asked. "I don't know," he admitted. "But I know I don't want this to be just one night." Neither did I, and that realization should have terrified me. Instead, it felt like waking up from a long, dreamless sleep. I'd spent 7 years being half alive, and now I remembered what it felt like to be whole. When he finally fell asleep, I lay awake watching the sunrise paint the guest room walls gold and pink. In a few hours, I'd have to return to my role as the perfect wife. I'd make coffee and breakfast, tidy the house, prepare for my husband's return. But I'd do it all as a different woman, one who remembered her own worth, her own desires, her own right to happiness. The wedding ring on my finger felt heavier than it had in years, not with guilt but with the weight of choice. I could take it off, could finally admit that the marriage it represented had died long before last night. Or I could leave it on and try to pretend nothing had changed, that I could go back to being satisfied with crumbs. But as I watched the man beside me sleep, his face peaceful in the growing light, I knew pretending was no longer an option. Whatever came next, I would face it as myself, fully awake, fully alive, and finally willing to fight for my own happiness. The guest room had become my sanctuary, and I never wanted to leave. Morning brought the cold reality of what I'd done crashing down like a wave. I woke up in his arms, and for one blissful moment, I felt nothing but contentment. Then I heard the familiar sound of my neighbor starting her car for her morning commute, and suddenly I was a 47-year-old married woman who'd just spent the night with her husband's nephew. I slipped out of bed carefully, trying not to wake him, and wrapped myself in the guest room's terry cloth robe. My reflection in the mirror stopped me cold. I looked different. My lips were swollen, my hair tangled, my skin flushed. I looked like a woman who'd been thoroughly loved, and the evidence was written all over my face. What had I done? The guilt hit me like a physical blow, doubling me over as I gripped the bathroom sink. I was a married woman. I'd made vows, built a life, created a home with a good man who worked hard and provided for me. Yes, we'd grown apart, but that didn't justify this. That didn't justify betraying everything I'd promised to be. But even as the shame washed over me, I couldn't bring myself to truly regret it. Last night had been the first time in years I'd felt completely myself, completely alive. How could I regret finally remembering who I was beneath all the expectations and responsibilities? I crept downstairs to make coffee, my bare feet silent on the hardwood floors. Everything looked the same. The kitchen where I'd kissed him 3 days ago, the dining room where we'd shared dinner, the living room where my husband and I watched television in comfortable silence. But I was different now, and the house felt like it belonged to someone else. My hands shook as I measured coffee grounds, and I spilled them across the counter. As I cleaned up the mess, tears started falling without warning. What was I crying for? The marriage I'd betrayed? The woman I'd been before yesterday? The impossible situation I'd created for myself? Hey. His voice was soft behind me, and I turned to find him in the doorway wearing yesterday's clothes, his hair rumpled from sleep. You okay? No, I said honestly. I don't think I am. He crossed the kitchen and pulled me into his arms, and I let myself lean into his strength for just a moment. He smelled like sleep in our night together, and my body responded automatically, remembering his touch. Talk to me, he said. I'm married, I whispered against his chest. I'm a married woman, and I just spent the night with another man. In my own house. In the room right next to where my husband and I sleep. I know. His hand smoothed down my hair. I know it's complicated. Complicated? I pulled back to look at him. It's not complicated. It's wrong. I took vows. I made promises. I built a life with someone, and last night I threw it all away for. For what? He asked quietly. For feeling alive again? For remembering that you're a woman with needs and desires? For choosing yourself for once instead of everyone else? His words hit too close to home, and I stepped away from him. It doesn't matter what I felt. Actions have consequences. Choices have costs. So what are you saying? I wrapped my arms around myself, suddenly cold. I'm saying this was a mistake. A beautiful, wonderful mistake, but still a mistake. My husband comes home tonight, and I have to figure out how to live with what I've done. The hurt that flashed across his face almost broke my resolve. So that's it? One night, and now you're going back to being invisible? I was never invisible, I said, but the words felt hollow. I was married. Happily married. Were you? He stepped closer again, his eyes intense. Were you really happy, or were you just comfortable? Was that really living, or were you just surviving? I wanted to argue with him, to defend my marriage and my choices and the life I'd built so carefully. But the words wouldn't come because deep down, I knew he was right. I'd been surviving, not living. Existing, not thriving. I'd been so busy being what everyone expected me to be that I'd forgotten who I actually was. It doesn't matter, I said finally. This is my life. These are my choices. I can't just throw it all away because I'm having a midlife crisis. Is that what you think this is? His voice was sharp now, frustrated. A midlife crisis? Not a woman finally remembering her worth? Before I could answer, my phone buzzed on the counter. A text from my husband, flight landed early. Home by noon. Miss you. The irony wasn't lost on me. He missed me now, after months of barely noticing I existed. He missed the woman who would have dinner waiting and a clean house and a smile that never demanded anything in return. He's coming home early, I said, and my voice sounded strange and distant. And? I looked at this man who'd reminded me what it felt like to be desired, who'd listened to my dreams and made me feel like they mattered. Then I looked at my wedding ring, still on my finger, representing 7 years of shared history and mutual commitment. And I need you to pack your things, I said quietly. I need you to leave before he gets here. The silence stretched between us, heavy and painful. I could see him processing my words, understanding that I was choosing my marriage over whatever this was between us. If that's what you want, he said finally. It's what has to happen. But even as I said the words, my heart was screaming that it wasn't what I wanted at all. What I wanted was to run away with him, to start over somewhere no one knew me as anything but myself. What I wanted was to stop being afraid and start living authentically, passionately, truthfully. What I wanted was impossible. So I stood in my kitchen, watching him gather his things, and tried to prepare myself to be a wife again. To smile when my husband came home, to ask about his trip, to pretend that nothing had changed when everything had changed. The front door closed behind him with a soft click, and I was alone in my perfect house with my perfect life, feeling more lost than ever. The house felt like a tomb after he left. I moved through the familiar rooms like a ghost, straightening pillows that didn't need straightening, wiping counters that were already clean. Anything to keep my hands busy while my mind churned with guilt and longing and a desperate need to feel normal again. My husband arrived home at 11:30, earlier than expected, his key turning in the lock while I stood frozen in the hallway like I'd been caught in the act of something. Which, in a way, I had been. Hey there, beautiful, he said, dropping his briefcase and pulling me into a hug that felt foreign after days of being held by someone else. I missed you. The endearment hit me like a slap. Beautiful. When was the last time he'd called me that before this week? When was the last time he'd said he missed me and meant it as more than polite conversation? How was your trip? I managed, my voice sounding almost normal to my own ears. Productive. The Henderson deal went through finally. He kissed my cheek, and I tried not to flinch at the contact. You look good. Different somehow. Did you do something with your hair? My hand flew automatically to my hair, which I'd spent 20 minutes styling to hide any evidence of my night in another man's bed. Just washed it. But he was already moving away, checking his phone, his attention already shifting back to work. The moment of unusual attentiveness passed like a brief weather system, leaving me standing in the hallway wondering if I'd imagined his interest. Where's Jake? He asked absently, scrolling through emails. Jake? The name hit me like cold water. My lover had a name, a real identity beyond just the nephew. Jake, who'd listened to my dreams and made me feel alive again. My nephew. Jake. Is he still here? He left this morning, I said, proud of how steady my voice remained. Said he had some interviews lined up in the city. My husband nodded without looking up from his phone. Good for him. Kid needs to get his act together. The casual dismissal of the man who'd changed my entire world in 4 days made my chest tight with anger. Jake wasn't just the kid who needed to get his act together. He was thoughtful and passionate and saw me in ways my own husband never had. But I couldn't say any of that without revealing everything. That afternoon, I tried to slip back into my old routine. I did laundry, planned meals, answered emails from the charity board I served on. All the activities that had filled my days for years. But nothing felt right. I kept expecting to hear his footsteps on the stairs, to see him reading in the living room, to smell his cologne in the guest room. Instead, there was just silence and the weight of my wedding ring, which felt heavier with every passing hour. My husband worked late again that night, just like always. I sat in our living room, staring at the television without seeing it, and wondered how I was supposed to pretend nothing had changed when everything had changed. How was I supposed to sleep in our bed, make love to my husband, smile and nod and play the role of content wife when I'd tasted something so much more real? My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Are you okay?" I stared at the message, my heart racing. Jake. Somehow he'd gotten my number, and the simple question nearly undid me. Was I okay? I was the furthest thing from okay. I was a woman standing at the crossroads between the life I'd built and the life I wanted, and I had no idea which path to choose. I typed and deleted a dozen responses before finally settling on, "I'm fine." The response came immediately, "That's not what I asked." He was right, of course. He'd always seen through my polite deflections, my automatic responses designed to avoid difficult conversations. Fine was what I told people when I didn't want to explain how I really felt. Before I could respond, another message appeared, "I'm not going to push. But I want you to know that what happened between us was real. You are worth so much more than settling for half a life." I read the message 3 times, tears blurring the words. Then I deleted the entire conversation and turned off my phone. But his words echoed in my head as I lay in bed next to my husband that night, listening to his steady breathing. You are worth so much more than settling for half a life. Was that what I'd been doing? Settling? I'd thought I was being mature, responsible, realistic about what marriage looked like after the honeymoon phase ended. Now I wondered if I'd just been afraid. Afraid to ask for more, afraid to rock the boat, afraid to admit that I deserved to be seen and wanted and chosen every single day, not just when it was convenient. My husband stirred beside me, reaching out in his sleep to pull me closer. His arm around my waist felt like a chain, and I had to force myself not to pull away. This was my life. This was my choice. This was what I'd committed to 7 years ago. But as I stared at the ceiling in the dark, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was slowly disappearing again, fading back into the woman who existed only to make everyone else's life easier. And for the first time in years, that thought terrified me more than the alternative. 3 weeks passed in a strange, suspended animation. I went through the motions of my life, grocery shopping, cooking dinner, attending charity meetings, but part of me remained in that guest room, wrapped in arms that had made me feel whole. My husband commented several times that I seemed distracted, but when I assured him everything was fine, he accepted my explanation without digging deeper. That should have been a relief, but instead it reinforced how little he actually knew me. I'd deleted Jake's number but found myself reaching for my phone dozens of times a day, wanting to text him, to hear his voice, to know if he was thinking about me too. The wanting was a physical ache that followed me everywhere. Then, on a Tuesday morning while my husband was in the shower, his phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. A text from Jake, "Uncle David, thanks again for letting me stay. I left something in the guest room. Can I swing by this afternoon to grab it?" My blood turned to ice. Jake was coming back. Here. Today. While my husband was home. I stared at the phone, my heart hammering so hard I was sure my husband would hear it over the running water upstairs. What had Jake left behind? More importantly, why hadn't he asked me directly instead of going through my husband? Unless he was using this as an excuse to see me again. The shower shut off upstairs, and I quickly moved away from the phone, busying myself with wiping down counters that were already spotless. My husband appeared a few minutes later, checking his messages while he poured coffee. "Jake's coming by this afternoon," he said casually. "Left something in the guest room apparently." "Oh," I managed, proud of how normal I sounded. "That's fine." But it wasn't fine. Nothing about this was fine. I spent the morning in a state of barely controlled panic, imagining all the ways this could go wrong. What if my husband noticed something in my expression when Jake arrived? What if Jake said something that gave us away? What if I couldn't hide how I felt about him? By the time the doorbell rang at 2 o'clock, I'd worked myself into such a state that I was genuinely nauseous. My husband answered the door while I hid in the kitchen, pretending to be absorbed in planning dinner. "Hey, Uncle David. Thanks for this." Jake's voice sent electricity through my entire body. I gripped the edge of the counter, trying to steady myself, trying to remember how to breathe normally. "No problem," my husband said. "What did you forget?" "My charger. Think I left it plugged in by the bed." They headed upstairs, their voices fading, and I forced myself to stay in the kitchen. I couldn't trust myself to see Jake again, couldn't trust that I wouldn't give everything away with a single look. But then I heard my husband's phone ringing in his study, heard him excuse himself to take the call. And suddenly Jake was standing in my kitchen doorway, looking exactly the same and completely different all at once. "Hi," he said softly. "You shouldn't be here." My voice came out as a whisper. "I know." He stepped closer, and I could smell his cologne, could see the gold flecks in his green eyes. "But I had to see you. I haven't been able to stop thinking about you." "Jake, don't." But even as I said it, I was drinking in the sight of him, remembering how it felt to be held by someone who truly saw me. "Tell me you haven't been thinking about me too," he challenged quietly. "Tell me it meant nothing to you, and I'll leave right now and never contact you again." I opened my mouth to lie, to say exactly what he'd asked me to say. The words that would protect my marriage, my comfortable life, my carefully maintained facade. But they wouldn't come. Instead, I found myself moving toward him, drawn by the same magnetic pull that had led me to his bed 3 weeks ago. He met me halfway, and when his hands cupped my face, I felt like I was finally home. "I can't stop thinking about you either," I admitted, the words tumbling out in a rush. I've tried to go back to the way things were, but I can't. You changed something in me, and I can't change it back." His thumb brushed across my cheek, and I realized I was crying. "Then don't," he said simply. "It's not that easy." "It is that easy," he interrupted. "It's terrifying and complicated and messy, but it's also that easy. Choose yourself. Choose what makes you happy. Choose me." Before I could respond, we heard my husband's footsteps on the stairs. Jake stepped back quickly, and I turned toward the sink, frantically wiping my eyes and trying to look normal. "Found it," my husband said, appearing in the kitchen with Jake close behind. "Right where you said it would be." Jake held up his phone charger like evidence, but his eyes were on me, searching my face for some sign of what I'd decided. "Great," I said, my voice only slightly shaky. "Well, it was good to see you again." The polite words felt like glass in my throat, especially when I saw the flash of hurt in Jake's eyes. But what else could I say with my husband standing right there? "Yeah," Jake said quietly. "You too." My husband walked him to the door while I stayed in the kitchen, gripping the counter so hard my knuckles went white. I heard the door close, heard my husband's footsteps returning, heard the normal sounds of our normal life resuming. But nothing was normal anymore. Jake's words echoed in my head, choose yourself. Choose what makes you happy. Choose me. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling while my husband slept peacefully beside me. Choose yourself. Such a simple concept, but one I'd forgotten was even an option. For 7 years, I'd been choosing everyone else, my husband's career, his preferences, his comfort. When had I last made a choice based purely on what I wanted? I thought about the woman I'd been in that guest room, alive and passionate and unafraid. I thought about my dreams of photography, of travel, of a life lived fully instead of safely. I thought about what it would feel like to wake up every morning next to someone who chose me back, who saw me as more than just a convenient accessory to his life. Choose me. As dawn broke outside my bedroom window, I finally knew what I was going to do. I waited until my husband left for work before I picked up my phone with shaking hands. The number I'd memorized despite deleting it a dozen times. My finger hovered over the call button for a full minute before I found the courage to press it. Hello? Jake's voice was cautious, uncertain. It's me, I said, and my voice cracked on the simple words. Are you okay? Such a loaded question. Was I okay? I was 47 years old, standing in my kitchen in my bathrobe, about to blow up my entire life. I should have been terrified. Instead, I felt more clear-headed than I had in years. No, I said honestly. I'm not okay. But I'm going to be. Silence stretched between us, and I could hear him breathing, waiting. I need to see you, I continued. We need to talk. Really talk. When? Now. Today. Can you meet me somewhere? Of course. Where? I thought about all the places we could meet. Coffee shops where neighbors might see us. Restaurants where my husband's colleagues might recognize me. Nowhere in our small suburban town felt safe. The park on Maple Street, I said finally. By the lake. Do you know it? I'll find it. Give me an hour? I'll be there. I spent that hour getting ready with more care than I'd taken in months. Not to impress anyone else, but to feel like myself. The self I'd rediscovered in his arms, the woman who deserved to be seen and chosen and loved completely. I found him sitting on a bench overlooking the water, and my heart did that familiar skip when I saw him. He stood as I approached, and we studied each other across 3 feet of charged air. You look beautiful, he said softly. Thank you. I sat down on the bench, leaving space between us but not too much. I've been thinking about what you said yesterday. And? I took a deep breath, gathering courage from somewhere deep inside me. You were right. I have been settling for half a life. I've been so afraid of being selfish, of disrupting everyone else's comfort, that I forgot I matter too. He moved closer, close enough that our knees touched. You do matter. You matter so much. I'm scared, I admitted. Terrified, actually. I've never done anything like this before. I've never been the kind of woman who breaks promises or leaves her husband or chooses herself over everyone else's expectations. What kind of woman do you want to be? The question hit me like a revelation. What kind of woman did I want to be? Not the one I'd been for 7 years, accommodating, invisible, grateful for scraps. Not the one everyone expected me to be, safe, predictable, convenient. I want to be the kind of woman who takes pictures of the northern lights in Iceland, I said slowly. Who travels to places she's never been. Who laughs until her sides ache and cries when she needs to and takes up space without apologizing for it. That sounds like an amazing woman. I want to be the kind of woman who chooses love over security, I continued, the words gaining strength as I spoke them. Who believes she deserves to be wanted and chosen and seen every single day, not just when it's convenient? He reached for my hand, and I let him take it. You are already that woman. You just forgot for a while. I thought about my husband, probably sitting in his office right now, completely unaware that his wife was sitting in a park planning to leave him. I should have felt guilty, but mostly I felt sad, sad for the love we'd lost somewhere along the way, sad for the woman I'd let myself become, sad for all the years I'd wasted being afraid. I'm going to ask for a divorce, I said, and saying the words out loud made them real. Jake squeezed my hand. Are you sure? No, I laughed, surprising myself. I'm not sure of anything except that I can't keep pretending to be someone I'm not. I can't keep living a half-life because it's easier than risking everything for a chance at a whole one. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching ducks glide across the lake. Normal people living their normal lives while I prepared to turn mine upside down. What happens next? He asked eventually. I don't know, I admitted. I've never done this before. I suppose I talked to a lawyer. Figure out how to divide up a life I spent 7 years building with someone else. And us? I turned to look at him, really look at him. This man who'd walked into my kitchen and reminded me who I used to be, who I could still become. This man who'd seen me not as someone's wife but as a woman worth choosing. I don't know that either, I said honestly. But I know I want to find out. I want to see where this goes when it doesn't have to be hidden, when we don't have to steal moments between other people's expectations. He leaned over and kissed me then, soft and sweet and full of promise. Not desperate like our first kisses had been, but certain. Like a beginning instead of an ending. When we broke apart, I felt different. Lighter. More myself than I'd been in years. My phone buzzed with a text from my husband, working late again tonight. Don't wait up. I looked at the message, then at Jake, then at the lake where ducks were living their uncomplicated lives. Then I turned off my phone and put it in my purse. I should go, I said, though I didn't want to. I have phone calls to make. Lawyers to research. A conversation to prepare for. When will you tell him? Tonight, when he gets home. Whenever that is. I stood up, feeling surprisingly steady. I'm not going to wait for the perfect moment. There isn't one. Jake stood too, and we faced each other like two people about to embark on separate journeys that might somehow lead to the same destination. I'm proud of you, he said. For choosing yourself. I kissed him one more time, tasting possibility and courage and the woman I was becoming. Then I walked back to my car, back to my house, back to the life I was about to leave behind. But this time, I wasn't walking back as the same woman who'd left. This time, I was walking back as someone who remembered her own worth. And for the first time in years, that felt like enough.